Chapter 1. Mac sighed softly and leaned her head back against her seat. Closing her eyes, she let her best friend and former college roommate's rambling words go in one ear and out the other. She loved Gia to death, but sometimes the woman talked too damn much. Not sometimes, most of the time. And now, after spending the last week with her at home in Arizona, she was ready for some peace and quiet, which wouldn't happen anytime soon. No, because she was stuck on a plane with the woman sitting right next to her. She loved Gia to death. I love Gia to death. But right now she wanted to kiss her with a club. Unfortunately, since they were on a plane flying to Boston, she didn't have a club handy, and, truth be told, the TSA frowned on carrying weapons in the cabin of an airplane, even if it was in first class, which is where their asses were currently planted. Maybe she should order another drink. They were free, after all, and it would soothe her frayed nerves. She was never a huge fan of flying and was glad to have a companion with her, but still, she was sorely tempted to get a third martini. The only reason Gia was accompanying her back to Boston was because one of her brothers recently had twins. For some reason, Gia had volunteered to come help out Gray's newly expanded family for a little while, which surprised the crap out of Mac. Apparently, the mother of said twins was a little overwhelmed. Twins would do that to you, she guessed. She didn't even want kids in the first place, Gia was saying. Mac lifted one eyelid. Who? Paige. She was in no rush to pop out any kids, and when she got knocked up, she freaked when she found out she was having twins. Does it run in the family? Whose? Mac opened her other eye and shrugged one shoulder as she looked at Gia. Hers. Yours? Not in ours. I'm not sure about hers, but I'm also not sure about Connor's. Mac shook her head. Connor? Yes, I told you. Both of my brothers are in polyamory relationships. Oh, yes, that's right. How odd was that? Both of Gia's brothers, Gray and Griff, were married to another couple, or however that worked. Was that even legal? She didn't care. It wasn't her business. Remember? Gray's with Paige and Connor. Gia leaned into Mac and whispered, Connor is a hot hunk of an Australian white meat. Phew. She lifted a well-manicured finger. And he still has his accent. Every time I hear it, I want to break out my vibrator since Gray won't share him with me. Mac twisted her head and stared at her friend. Why the hell would your brother share his husband with his sister? She wrinkled up her nose. Ew. Gia grinned, her dark brown eyes sparkling. It's not like I'm related to him. Do they have an open relationship? No. Mac threw up her hands and rolled her eyes. Well then, I don't blame Gray for not letting you borrow his husband. Wait, are they officially married now? They're married, but I don't think it's legally binding. Paige and Connor were already married when they met Gray. Wasn't that weird? Gia shrugged. Not for them, I guess. Not for me either. It works. Honestly, I'm so damn jealous. I want what they have. I want what Griff has too. Ah, yes. Griff. When Mac had met both Gray and Griff while in college, she had endless fantasies about both of Gia's brothers. But she never told Gia because those fantasies were so dirty. She'd end up getting herself off just by thinking about them. Sometimes she pretended she was with both of them at the same time. Yes, she could understand Gia's fascination with threesomes, and her brothers were dark and mysterious and so damn hot. Both were also super-duper alpha males. Yum. However, those types were great for sex, but hard to live with, as Mac had discovered. Mac squeezed her thighs together and slowly let out a breath. Getting horny 30,000 feet in the air wasn't going to do her any good, especially since she couldn't do anything about it. It turns out that Griff and Gray were both bisexual, which made those fantasies even hotter. Not that she had any with the two of them recently. Okay, she might have, but she wasn't confessing that to Gia. While she never met Connor, she had seen Trey Holloway, Griff's husband, or boyfriend, or lover, Whatever. On the television many, many times. He was a Super Bowl champion, after all. If she remembered correctly, Trey retired from football a few years back and now was an attorney at Griff's high-profile law firm. She wiped at the corner of her mouth. Maybe she needed to add Trey to her fantasy harem, too. Oh, good Lord. She needed to get laid. It had been too long. She needed to stop fantasizing about the men in Gia's family like a sex-starved addict. Honestly, she just needed to get laid to take off the edge. She realized Gia was still talking. Of course. One of these days, I'm going to find 2 men, and won't our parents freak out when I bring them home for Thanksgiving? Why? Because, can you imagine 3 out of your 4 children being in threesomes? You probably start wondering where you went wrong. That could be a little odd, she supposed. But then, weren't threesomes odd in general? While she'd fantasized about them, she'd never been in one in reality. Or, what you did right, Max suggested. What about Gail? Gail can't find one good man to put up with her bougie ass. Mac bit back a snort. And you can? Gia's dark, full lips flattened out. I'm picky. A sigh slipped past Max. I have no room to talk. I mean, we went to our college reunion as each other's dates the other night, so I'm in the same boat. Where are all the good ones? A set of eyeballs peering in between the 2 seats in front of them had Mac jerking back in surprise and pinning herself to her seat. The blue eyes blinked. The mouth, also related to the face, grinned. Hi, ladies. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. If you're looking for a volunteer to be in your threesome. He waggled his blonde, bushy eyebrows. Being with 2 women has always been a fantasy of mine. Gia stared at the guy, turned to look at Mac, raised a sculpted dark eyebrow, and then rolled her eyes. It's most men's fantasy. It just will never be their reality, Gia informed him. Suddenly, the guy was perched on his knees and leaning over the back of the seat. The stranger lowered his voice to an almost Barry White low. But you ladies can make it my reality. No, Mac was wrong. It was more like Barry Manilow. Did he think that come-on was sexy and irresistible? Because if so, he was dead wrong. Gia's chin snapped back and she lifted one finger. Again. But this time it meant something totally different. Oh shit. Mac knew exactly what that meant. Gia was about to get real. And most sane people didn't want to be on the receiving end of that. Turn around and sit your ass down. I just want to offer my services. Did I stutter? Sit yo ass down. I am sitting, he huffed. If your ass ain't in that seat, you are not sitting. Gia circled that dangerous finger in the air. Turn around, fool. He frowned. Well, if... Ba ba ba. Gia cut him off, close to shoving that finger against his lips. Don't make me have the air marshal tase your ass. Turn around. The man's lips flattened out and he flopped back into his seat with a grumble. Man thinks he can handle both of us. Please. At the same time, she shook her head and tutted. Max smothered a laugh with her hand. Gia reached up and pressed the button for the flight attendant, who appeared by Mac's elbow so quickly that she jumped in surprise. Ma'am? Gia gave the woman a saccharine sweet Gia smile. We need 2 more dirty martinis, and the man in front of me needs a tissue for his tears and a foam donut for his sore ass. Mac didn't bother to stifle her laugh this time. A few minutes later, the attendant was back with their martinis and a travel-sized packet of tissues for the butthurt man. 2 hours later, they were finally shuffling off the plane. She couldn't wait to exit and stretch her legs. While she had been in first class, she knew it was worse for the folks crammed into coach. And that's exactly where she would have been if Gia hadn't upgraded her ticket so they could sit next to each other. As they got to the front of the plane, where an attendant and one of the pilots stood thanking the passengers as they exited, Gia stopped short and Mac ran into the back of her with an oof. Before Mac could scold her for stopping so suddenly, she heard, "Ooh, look at that hunk of deliciously dark man meat," Gia purred. Where? Gia was tall. Mac was not. All Mac could see was the woman's back, and Gia quickly running a hand over her short bob to make sure her hair was perfect. It was. Gia's hair was always perfectly coiffed, unlike Mac's, whose red hair was always unruly and she had to use 5,000 products and a flat iron so she didn't look like an evil clown when it frizzed. But it was all useless if the weather was even a little bit humid. Poof! Her makeup was never on point like Gia's either because, well, she just didn't care, or have that kind of skill. She wasn't a sloppy person, she was neat and put together, but because she had to spend enough time on her hair every morning, she was just too exhausted to do anything other than slap on some blush. And she only did that so she didn't look like death warmed over. She spent most of her teenage years worried about covering her freckles with foundation. However, she was now past the point of caring. If someone didn't like her freckles, that was on them, not her. People assumed she was from Irish descent because of her hair color and her blue eyes. Most of the time she didn't correct them. And her thoughts were interrupted when Gia finally moved forward enough to see why the woman stopped short. Oh, yes. Now she completely understood it. Of course, it was because it was a man. But not just any man. A man. In uniform, tall, dark, one with total panty-melting potential. And the dark part wasn't just his hair. While that was black and trimmed neatly and tightly against his head, she was talking about his complexion. He was almost as dark as Gia. Almost, but not quite. He wore a pilot's uniform and a friendly smile surrounded by a neatly trimmed goatee as he thanked the passengers exiting. Gia was next in line. "Don't touch him, girl. Don't. I don't want to see you taken down by some air marshal and have to get Griff to get you out of a jam. Hands and feet to yourself. Tongue too. Please don't lick the pilot." Wait, was she warning Gia or herself? Gia stopped in front of the man, doing a very obvious and thorough head-to-toe and back check. The pilot grinned. The corner of his dark brown eyes crinkled, and he gave a deep and delicious, "Thank you for flying with us." Gia actually visibly quivered in her very inappropriate for flying high-heeled boots. After a few seconds of Gia remaining in place, the pilot lifted his dark eyebrows and his grin slipped. Mac could almost understand the look of fear the man was obviously trying to mask. Gia was probably looking at him like he was a chocolate lava cake and she was on a strict sugar-free diet. "Gia!" Mac warned her in a hiss. Gia dismissed Mac with a wave of her hand over her shoulder. However, Mac saying the woman's name had drawn the pilot's attention. Oops. "I hope you fly with us again," the man said in a dismissing tone to Gia as he stared at Mac. His dark, full, very kissable lips widened into an open smile. It was big, seemed genuine and so bright Mac almost lifted a hand to shade her eyes. "Damn." "Of course," Gia grumbled and violently yanked on her rolling carry-on out of the plane and onto the ramp with a curse. "It's those damn freckles." As Mac moved forward with her eyes glued to his, she watched in fascination as words began to spill from those luscious lips. "Thank you for..." she gasped as she got slammed in the back and knocked forward. The pilot caught her before she accidentally face-planted on him. "Come on, I have a flight to catch," griped the man behind her. With a hand to Mac's elbow and another on the handle of her carry-on, the pilot tugged her to his side so the impatient man could pass. It was so tight in that spot that Mac felt the need to suck in her gut just to squeeze in. "You okay?" Holy moly, that voice. Deep, rich, smooth as blackstrap molasses. Now that could be compared to Barry White. Heat spiraled through her. "Want to see my cockpit?" Then exploded from her center. "Let's get out of the way," he suggested. Mac's mouth gaped open, and before she could respond, she and her bag were pulled into the cockpit. There wasn't much room in there either, especially after he closed the door behind her. In fact, they were almost chest to chest, except that wasn't exactly true since he was much taller than her. Much taller. Chest to stomach was more like it. And he was pretty damn broad-shouldered to have to work in such a tight spot. He cleared his throat and her gaze rose, landing just above his collar on his pronounced Adam's apple. It bobbed when he said,
"Let me introduce myself. I'm Damon Brooks."
Mac closed her mouth, swallowed, then told his sexy throat, "Mac."
"Mac?"
She closed her eyes for a second and shook her head, trying to knock some sense back into it. "Mackenzie Donovan." She finally lifted her eyes to see not only his grin, but amusement making his dark brown eyes twinkle.
"The name fits you,"
he murmured. She tilted her head and grinned back. "So does yours." His lips twitched.
"Touché."
He studied her for a long moment, then his brows pinned together.
"You look familiar."
It didn't seem to be a pickup line. He seemed serious. "Maybe I have a doppelganger out there somewhere. You probably see thousands of people every year with your jet-setting ways." Though, she only hoped her doppelganger had much better hair.
No,"
he said slowly, concentrating even harder on her face, which made her want to squirm.
"No. I've seen you somewhere before, not as a passenger. Do you live in Boston?"
Should she answer that? How many pilots were serial killers? She could ask Google just to be safe. "In the area, yes. Do you?"
"I do. Maybe I've seen you in the city."
"I try to avoid the city," which was true.
"Me too. I prefer quiet when I'm not working."
He put his hand on his jaw and tapped his finger against his enticing, broad, very suckable lips, especially that bottom one. Damn. She'd like to tug on that one with her teeth, after sucking on it, of course. His head snapped up and his eyes widened.
"Now I remember. I messaged you and never got a response back."
You messaged me? What was he talking about?
"You aren't on the Boston Singles app?"
Oh, shit. Should she deny it? His delicious lips flattened out as he pulled something from his back pocket. Crap. His cell phone. Mac's heart raced as she watched as his long, neatly manicured fingers tapped at the screen. A few swipes up, a few swipes right, and voila. Her own face was looking back at her. She was staring at her own profile pic on Boston Singles. Busted. At least that pic was taken on a good hair day, though every freckle across her face beamed like a melanin beacon.
"That's you."
His tone had a tinge of accusation. Shit. "I didn't want to be on the app," she said quickly. "My best friend forced me to. Don't take it personally. I haven't messaged anyone back, not just you."
"So, you remember my message?"
Crap. She didn't. She hadn't wanted to join a singles app. Gia had forced her to over a year ago, after the last alpha hole she was dating dumped her. She had only joined to shut her up. While she had skimmed some of the messages, most were unbelievably inappropriate. She never responded to any of them. Even the hot guys who had a decent profile, she just didn't believe they were real. Otherwise, why would they need to be on a singles app? If their profile wasn't fake, wouldn't they have been snapped up by a woman already? Of course they would. Or so she told herself to push aside the guilt of ignoring all 300 of her private messages. Or it had been 300 the last she checked, which was a month ago. A couple more swipes later, he held out his phone to her. She reluctantly took it and read his message. It was well written, polite, and a dick pic wasn't attached to it. A rarity. The grammar and spelling were on point. Another rarity. Without looking at him, she clicked on his profile and scanned it quickly. Oh yeah. Another profile she felt was too good to be true. I mean, come on, a hot pilot who's single? Pfft. She lifted her head and handed his phone back to him. His long fingers brushed against hers, causing a shiver to slide down her spine. If it's any comfort, I did notice you. There are so many fake profiles. Lame. Then I noticed on your profile you were bi and open about it. She did remember that part. They had definitely stood out in his description. He arched a brow.
You're against a man being open sexually?
No, but there are enough women out there I need to live up to. I don't need to add in the rest of the population. I'd go into any date with a bisexual man at a disadvantage, since you'd be comparing me to both sexes. His mouth dropped open for a second, then he tipped his head back and laughed. Mac licked her lips as she watched his throat arch and his wide shoulders shake with each deep, sexy chuckle. When he was done, he asked,
That's what you think?
She shrugged and gave him a small smile. That's what my neurosis thinks. Since I've never dated someone who is bi, I can't confirm that notion.
You never dated anyone who is bi that you know of.
Good point. True, you got me on that. She quickly took inventory of the men she had dated all the way back to junior high. Had any of them been bi? He glanced at his cell phone again.
Sorry to cut this enlightening conversation short, but I have another flight I need to prepare for soon.
He tucked his phone back into his back pocket of his well-fitted uniform slacks, the ones that hugged what looked like very powerful thighs, thighs she could never see or feel or ride. Damn it. She went to turn, but he grabbed her shoulder, holding her in place. His fingers squeezed slightly.
I'd like to finish this conversation at a later time.
Not a question, but it sounded more like a demand. Even so, what was there to continue?
Possibly over coffee.
The corners of his eyes crinkled.
Or a dirty martini.
How had he known? When it comes to martinis, I normally prefer lemon drops. It's Gia who likes them dirty. Mac cringed on how that came out. He dipped his head, still amused.
Lemon drops, then.
I don't know. Maybe.
I need your number.
Again, not a request, but a demand. However, she wanted to ask, why? Why was he interested in her? She was boring, and not nearly as gorgeous or exotic-looking as Gia. Why had he focused his attention on her instead? Gia was the one always on the search for a man. Or men, to be truthful, since she was determined to find not only one, but two. You can send me a message on the app, she suggested.
The app you don't respond to messages on?
He said flatly. Yes, that was the one. I'll turn on the push notifications for your profile so I don't miss yours. He clearly didn't believe her, which was confirmed when he asked.
Promise?
No. Yes, I promise. His eyes slid to the closed door.
Your friend is probably worried about you.
Not worried, but waiting impatiently. Probably with her phone glued to her ears, she tapped the toe of her high-heeled leather boot with annoyance. Or Gia could be flirting with any handsome guy in her vicinity. It could go either way with her. Damon. It was nice to think of him as something other than the pilot. Reached past her and unlatched the cockpit door, swinging it open. The pull of his uniform shirt over what seemed to be well-developed muscles caught her attention, especially with the way the crisp white fabric emphasized the deep color of his skin. She lost her train of thought, until he smiled in amusement once again. Damn. She shook herself mentally. It was nice meeting you, and thank you for landing the plane safely. His lips twitched.
Anytime.
He lifted a hand. Max stared at it stupidly as it hung there between them. What? Oh. Good Lord, she was losing it. She clasped his hand and his fingers curled warmly around hers. Those long, strong fingers. Instead of shaking hers, he gave her hand a firm squeeze. Something deep inside her squeezed, too. Then he went through his spiel, his deep voice washing over her.
Thank you for flying the friendly skies with us. It's been a pleasure to serve you, and I hope to service you in the future.
Making her squeeze her thighs together and her nipples bead painfully. Wait. What?
I said, I hope you fly with us again.
Before she melted in an embarrassing puddle at his feet, he released her hand and then raised it in invitation for her to exit the cockpit. She unstuck her feet and moved forward after grabbing her carry-on's handle. As she yanked her bag with her, he called out,
Hey, Mackenzie?
The plane was now empty except for some cleaning staff who were collecting garbage and putting away blankets and pillows. She twisted her head to glance back at him.
I really want to get to know you.
While that sounded sincere, she still wondered why. She could only nod in answer.
And I want you to get to know me.
He added. Wasn't that how it worked?
To facilitate that, I'll give you this little tidbit that isn't in my profile.
Oh, here it comes. He was going to tell her how many inches was packed into his pants. That's what most of the app's messages she had received included. Some of the men even held a ruler next to their erections in the photo they sent to prove they weren't lying.
My favorite color is red.
Her hand automatically went up to her hair, but she dropped it quickly when she realized what she was doing. A wave of heat burst into her cheeks. Damn. She took one last look at him to add him to her memory bank for later. Gray and Griff, move the hell over.